My fiancée publicly humiliated me at dinner while I covered her debt, so I walked out. And she realized I was gone forever. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I thought I'd finally found someone I could trust completely. I've always been careful with who I let into my life work bills. Stability have always been my priorities, but Sophie felt different from the start. She had this charm that wasn't forced, the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd known her forever. She was the type of person whose family everyone seemed to adore instantly. I remember thinking, finally, someone I can see a real future with. My life wasn't perfect, but I'd worked hard to get here. I had a decent apartment, a career that paid the bills, and then some, and a sense of independence I'd fought for since my early 20s. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I just wanted someone I could share it with. And Sophie. She fit in seamlessly. Weekend plans were easy. Brunches, walks, movie nights, even those small silly adventures she insisted we try. We talked about long-term goals, vacations, and what our lives might look like together. I loved that we could dream aloud without judgment, but there were subtle things too. Sophie sometimes mentioned how tight money was for her family, how she had a couple of lingering bills she hadn't been able to pay yet. She spoke casually, almost apologetically, like it wasn't a big deal, but I felt the sudden pull I wanted to help. I can cover that for now, I'd say. And she'd flash that half smile, that look that made me feel needed, appreciated. It wasn't just about money, it felt like trust, like she was letting me in on a small, private part of her life. By the end of those early months, I was proud. Proud to support someone I genuinely cared about, to be there for someone who made me feel both grounded and alive. I thought I was building something real, something meaningful, and I let myself believe this was just the start of a life I could finally share with someone I trusted completely. But I had no idea how quickly that trust could be weaponized. Things started small at first. Sophie would text me about a forgotten bill or a missed payment, usually with that apologetic tone that made me feel like I had to help. "I'll pay you back soon," she'd say, and I believed her every time. I didn't mind. Honestly, it made me feel like I was contributing to something bigger than myself, like I was part of her life in a way that mattered. I was proud to be that person, proud that someone I loved trusted me enough to lean on. It wasn't just about money, though. It was the little moments, the way she'd look at me when I offered help, like I was the only one who truly understood her struggles. "You always know how to make things better," she said one evening, as we shared a quiet dinner in my apartment. I smiled, but inside, I felt this swell of responsibility, like I was supposed to be her rock, and I was okay with that. At least I thought I was. Weekend plans shifted too. Brunches turned into shopping trips. Movie nights turned into dinners at pricier restaurants she couldn't afford right now. And every time she mentioned her financial stress, I would offer quietly, almost instinctively. I told myself, it's temporary. It's not about the money, it's about us. My friends noticed the pattern too. "Dude, are you sure you should be covering all this?" one of them asked over drinks. I shrugged. "She's worth it," I said, and I really believed that. But even as I covered bills and lent small amounts for this and that, I started noticing little inconsistencies. Sophie would talk about paying things off, and then suddenly there'd be a new expense, or a vague excuse about why she hadn't yet. Nothing alarming yet. Just enough to make me think maybe I need to pay closer attention. By the end of the month, I felt proud and fulfilled, almost like I was doing something meaningful, not just helping, but truly supporting someone I loved. I thought I was building a foundation of trust and love, but the truth was, this foundation was already being tested in ways I couldn't yet see. It hit me one evening when Sophie casually mentioned a credit card bill she hadn't been able to cover. I'd already helped with a few smaller things that month, but this one felt heavier. "I didn't want to bother you with this," she said, twirling her hair nervously. I waved it off. "It's fine, I've got you," I said, feeling that familiar mix of pride and obligation. On the surface, I was just helping. Inside, though, there was a creeping unease, a tiny voice whispering, "Why does it always fall on you?" The next few weeks followed a pattern that started to make me feel stretched thin. I was covering groceries, paying off late bills, even putting extra money toward things I didn't fully understand, like some mysterious urgent expenses she claimed would get sorted soon. Every time I asked for clarification, she smiled, leaned in close, and said, "Don't worry about it. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I started noticing the subtle manipulation, too. It wasn't blatant. It was in the way she framed everything, making me feel proud for helping while somehow making me question if I was doing enough. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I mentioned, "It feels like there's always something else you need help with." Sophie tilted her head, gave me that soft, almost hurt look, and whispered, "You're amazing. I don't know what I'd do without you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. That look, half gratitude, half guilt-tripping, was powerful. I was hooked. Even my friends started noticing. "Bro, she's really leaning on you," one said during a lunch catch-up. "Yeah, but she needs me," I replied quickly. I didn't say the part I wouldn't admit even to myself, that I was beginning to feel trapped. Like my support was no longer just appreciated, it was expected by the end of that month. I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally, but I convinced myself it was worth it. I told myself, love is sacrifice, right? This is what supporting someone feels like. Little did I know, the small debts, the subtle manipulations, they were all just the beginning of a much bigger betrayal waiting to unfold by now. I could feel the tension building, even if I didn't want to admit it. Sophie's requests were becoming more frequent, more casual, almost like second nature to her. A lunch here, a last-minute bill there, and every time I handed over the money, she'd flash that smile that made me feel like I was doing something noble. But I couldn't shake the nagging thought, why am I always the one sacrificing? It was during one of our weekend plans that the unease hit hardest. We were at a small cafe, the kind with dim lighting and soft music playing over the speakers, trying to enjoy our Saturday morning. Sophie mentioned needing a new phone charger, her third this month, and I felt a flicker of irritation. I knew I should have said no. I knew I should have set boundaries. But instead, I pulled out my card, bought it without a word. She reached across the table, touching my hand gently, whispering, "You're too good to me." And just like that, any frustration I felt melted away. Replaced by this sinking mix of pride and obligation, friends had started giving me subtle warnings too. "Are you sure you're not being used?" one asked casually during drinks. I laughed it off. "I just like helping her," I said. But inside, the unease was growing like a shadow I couldn't shake. I tried rationalizing it. Love isn't always easy. Supporting each other sometimes means sacrifice. But the signs were there. Sophie would occasionally deflect questions about her finances or brush off details about her bills. I caught myself hesitating before asking. Something about it didn't feel right, yet I told myself I was overthinking. I am G. By the end of that weekend, I was proud of us, or at least proud of what I thought I was doing for us. I believed that supporting Sophie, even when it stretched me thin, was proof of my love. I had no idea that beneath the charm and gratitude, a storm was quietly gathering. One that would test my trust in ways I wasn't remotely prepared for. It was around this time that I started noticing the first real signs of manipulation, though I didn't want to call it that yet. Sophie had this way of twisting moments to make me feel both needed and guilty at the same time. One evening, as we were scrolling through our weekend plans, she looked at me with wide, almost pleading eyes. "You're always so careful with money. I just wish I could be as responsible as you," she said softly. Her tone wasn't accusing, but there was an unmistakable weight in it. I felt my chest tighten. I'm supposed to feel proud, right? Instead, I felt cornered. Dinner dates became longer, pricier, and increasingly centered around her financial emergencies, which seemed to pop up with uncanny timing. She'd lean in close, whispering, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't really important. And I'd nod, giving her the money or covering yet another bill. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, why do I always say yes? But every time I hesitated, she'd flash that smile, that vulnerable look. And I felt compelled to act. One night, as we were walking back to my apartment, I voiced what had been gnawing at me. Sophie, I feel like I'm constantly covering things for you. Are you sure this is temporary? She laughed softly, The kind of laugh that makes you forget your frustration for a split second. Oh, come on. Don't be silly. I'd never let you struggle for me, she said, brushing it off, slipping her hand into mine. That moment, that mix of charm and dismissal, kept me tethered to her, even as the unease grew. Even my friends were noticing subtle changes in my mood. You seem drained, one remarked, and I laughed nervously. It's nothing, I said, but the truth was, I was slowly being worn down emotionally. Every act of help was another thread in a net I didn't realize I was stepping into by the end of that week. I was exhausted, but convinced I was still doing the right thing. Little did I know. The real test, the moment when all that trust and patience would be weaponized, was just around the corner. The night of the dinner is etched into my memory, not in the way I ever wanted. Sophie had suggested going out to a fancy restaurant with some of her friends and her family, an evening I thought would be fun, casual, and maybe even a little romantic. I dressed carefully, made sure my wallet was full, and even checked in to make sure everything was okay with the reservations. I had no idea it would turn into the night that broke me. At first, everything seemed normal. The wine was poured, the laughter flowed, and I felt a familiar mix of pride and love watching Sophie interact with her family. But then, midway through the meal, her tone shifted. It started as a joker. At least I thought it was about me being so responsible with money while she lived the high life. I chuckled nervously, assuming she was teasing, and then it escalated. Sophie's comments became pointed, sarcastic, public, and humiliating. Honestly, I don't know how you put up with me paying for everything, she said, her voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. Laughter followed from a few people, and I felt my face flush. Heat rose to my ears. Was this real? Was she really saying this in front of everyone? I tried to defend myself quietly, muttering, "It's fine, I'm happy to help." But she cut me off. Happy? You're broke and miserable, pretending to be a hero while I cover my life, she said, smirking. My stomach dropped. Every dinner I'd covered, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made was twisted into mockery right in front of her. Friends and family. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't seen before. This wasn't just about money. This was calculated. She wasn't struggling or vulnerable. She was manipulating me, publicly, deliberately. My heart raced, my hands shook slightly under the table, and the room felt like it was closing in. I wanted to say something. Yell, defend myself, but I couldn't. I froze, caught between humiliation and disbelief. The Sophie I thought I knew, the one I trusted completely, was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And in that freeze, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay silent forever. Left the restaurant that night with my chest tight and my hands trembling. The cold air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. The hum of traffic and distant laughter from other diners making me feel even smaller. I wanted to scream, to demand respect, to make her understand what she had done, but every instinct told me to stay quiet. I couldn't, not yet. For hours, I walked aimlessly, trying to process what had just happened. Every step echoed in my head, her words, her smirk, the laughter. I kept replaying the dinner over and over, searching for some clue, some excuse that might make it make sense. But there was none. This was deliberate. Every time I had helped her, every small sacrifice I had made, it had been twisted into some cruel joke, and I had been the punchline. When I finally got home, I tried calling her. I needed to hear an explanation. The line went straight to voicemail. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to send a message. What do I even say? Why did you humiliate me in front of everyone? Do you realize what you've done? Nothing felt right. My anger mixed with disbelief. Part of me wanted to crawl into bed and pretend the night had never happened. Friends reached out the next day, asking if I was okay. I don't even know what to say, I confessed, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked. They didn't know the full story, couldn't fully grasp the humiliation and betrayal. I didn't even fully understand it myself. Part of me wanted to blame myself, wonder if I had missed something, done something wrong. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't my fault. Still, the sting of it clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't ignore it, but I also couldn't confront her, yet not with the clarity and strength I needed. I felt caught between shock and denial. I'm sure if I could ever look at her the same way again, and even as I tried to convince myself I could move past it, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still yet to come. The next few days were a haze of anxiety and anger. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, expecting it to be Sophie. Her name on the screen felt like a trigger. I needed answers, but I also knew I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. I had to confront her, but I needed control, clarity, and a way to protect myself from another humiliation. Finally, I told myself I couldn't avoid it anymore. I called her and asked if we could meet somewhere quiet. She agreed, her tone casual, almost flirty, as if nothing had happened. That alone made my stomach churn. When I saw her at the coffee shop, sitting with that same easy smile, I felt the anger rise again. But this time it was sharper, colder. I sat down across from her, trying to steady my breathing. About the other night, I started, keeping my voice even. What you did. Humiliating me in front of your friends and family, it wasn't okay? She blinked, tilting her head slightly, feigning innocence. I don't know what you mean, she said smoothly, sipping her coffee. My chest tightened. That tone, that exact tone. She's done this before, and she knows it. I pressed harder. Sophie, every dinner, every bill, every favor I've done, it's not just about money. It's about trust. And you made a joke out of it. You made me a joke. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then she smirked. Oh, come on. It wasn't that bad. You're overreacting. Every nerve in my body screamed at me. I could feel the betrayal all over again, the humiliation from that night replaying like a movie I couldn't turn off. I realized something terrifying. She wasn't going to admit it, apologize, or even feel guilt. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, and she didn't see a problem with it. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice: keep letting her manipulate me, or finally take control and set boundaries she could never cross again. I spent the night after that coffee shop meeting alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was suffocating. The weight of everything, the humiliation, the betrayal, the countless sacrifices hit me all at once. I could still hear her voice in my head, smooth and dismissive, twisting my kindness into weakness. How did I not see it before? I kept replaying every dinner, every bill I'd covered, every time I'd bent over backward to help her. It wasn't just money. It was my trust, my patience, my heart. I looked around my apartment, my sanctuary. My little corner of control land, suddenly it felt empty, hollow. Everything I'd worked for, every careful step I'd taken in life, seemed meaningless compared to the way she had manipulated me. I felt small, foolish, and utterly powerless. My chest ached, my hands shook, and for the first time in months, I felt a wave of despair that I couldn't push aside with rationalizations or self-talk. I had hit rock bottom. I tried to distract myself, mindless scrolling. Music turned loud, anything to drown out the memory, but nothing worked. Her smirk, her words, the laughter from the restaurant, it all burned into my mind. And the worst part? I realized she had no remorse. None. Every apology I had imagined in my head, every confrontation I had rehearsed, was useless because she didn't see a problem. She had won in every sense, and I felt like I had lost not only her, but my sense of judgment, my pride, and a piece of myself I didn't know I'd given away so freely. I wanted to call her, scream, demand justice, but even that felt futile. I felt trapped in a cycle of humiliation and self-blame that I couldn't escape. I had given everything and gotten nothing but ridicule in return, and in that dark, silent night, I made a promise to myself. I would never let someone wield my trust and kindness like a weapon again. I didn't yet know how, but I knew one thing: change had to start with me, and in that moment of absolute despair, I realized the turning point was finally coming. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The shame, the humiliation, the endless cycle of manipulation, it all hit me at once. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. No calls, no explanations, No more bending over backward to justify someone else's selfish behavior. I was done. I texted Sophie, short and to the point. We need to take a break. I can't continue like this. I didn't expect her to understand. She never did, but I didn't care. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Come on, don't do this. I'll make it right, she wrote, in that same teasing, manipulative tone. I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. My heart was racing, but underneath it all was a quiet certainty. I was reclaiming control. Later that evening, I went to her apartment one last time, not to plead or explain, but to collect my things and leave. The sight of her smiling, expecting some apology or hesitation from me, only fueled my resolve. I'm leaving, I said firmly, keeping my voice steady. She tilted her head, feigning confusion. Leaving? Really? After everything? She asked. I shook my head. Yes, forever. I can't let this continue. Not with you, not like this. Her expression shifted for a moment's surprise, anger, maybe even a flicker of fear, but it was fleeting. I walked out, each step lighter than the last, every second freeing me from the weight she'd placed on my shoulders for months. The air outside was crisp, almost cleansing, as if the world itself was acknowledging the first day of my freedom. I didn't look back. I didn't reply to her frantic messages, the calls, the texts. I simply left. And with each passing block, I felt my dignity and self-respect slowly return. For the first time in months, I realized I didn't need her approval, her gratitude, or her manipulation to feel whole, and in that quiet, resolute moment, I understood that some people only learn the value of what they had once it's gone. Weeks passed, and Sophie's absence slowly became a presence in my life. Her texts stopped at first, then started coming again, tentative, desperate. Filled with apologies she thought might work. I'm sorry. Can we talk? I didn't mean it like that. Stared at my phone, feeling the old anger flare up, but underneath it was a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time, she was the one chasing me, not the other way around. I saw her a few times on social media too, posting pictures, updates, little moments where she seemed to pretend nothing had happened. I knew she was watching, waiting, hoping I'd slip back in. But I didn't. I realized the power had shifted. All those months of me bending over backward, covering her debts, and tolerating manipulation, it had finally flipped. Now, she was the one facing the consequences of her actions. Friends noticed the change in me, too. You seem lighter, one said during a lunch meetup. I nodded, smiling faintly. I feel like I finally took back control of my life, I admitted. For the first time, I wasn't defined by her or her manipulations. I was free to breathe, to make decisions without guilt, to rebuild boundaries that had been eroded. Sophie tried reaching out one last time. Please, I was joking. I didn't mean it, she wrote. I read it, felt a twinge of the old hurt, but it was distant now, like a memory, not a wound. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The lesson had been learned, and this time, wasn't letting anyone take my dignity for granted. In the quiet aftermath, I realized something crucial. Empowerment wasn't about revenge or retaliation. It was about walking away from those who had made a mockery of your trust, reclaiming your worth, and refusing to let anyone dictate how you should feel. And watching Sophie finally understand she had lost me forever, that was more powerful than any argument, any confrontation, or any payment I could have made. It's been months since I walked away. And for the first time, I feel truly at peace. I've reclaimed my life, my finances, my energy, and most importantly, my self-respect. Walking away from Sophie wasn't easy. There were nights I questioned myself, moments when the old habit of trying to fix things tugged at me. But every time I remembered that night at the restaurant, her smirk, the way she turned every act of kindness into mockery, I knew I had made the right choice. I've spent that time reflecting on what happened, on the warning signs I ignored and the boundaries I didn't enforce. I've realized that love isn't supposed to hurt like that, not to the point where you're questioning your own worth. Supporting someone isn't the same as being a doormat, and trust isn't a weapon to be wielded. Those lessons were harsh, but they were necessary. Life after Sophie has felt lighter, like breathing for the first time in months. I've started focusing on myself, free-building my savings, investing in my hobbies, even reconnecting with friends I had drifted from while being caught up in her world. I'm learning to recognize genuine kindness versus manipulation. And every day, I feel more grounded, more confident, and more in control. And then there's the little ironic satisfaction. Sophie reached out recently, trying her old tactics. But now, they fall flat. I no longer feel compelled to justify myself or explain my choices. I've finally internalized the truth. Some people only realize what they had once it's gone, and I'm no longer available to be their lesson. The greatest victory isn't revenge, it's freedom. Walking away, reclaiming my dignity, and choosing myself over someone who only saw my support as an opportunity, that was the real triumph. And in that quiet, powerful moment of empowerment, I finally felt the weight lift completely. I'm free. I'm whole. And this time, nothing can take that away.